The warning came in at 3 in the morning. Not a forecast, not a watch. A direct alert from the National Weather Service, using language so severe that the meteorologist who read it checked the system twice to make sure it wasn't a glitch. It wasn't. And by the time you finish watching this video, you will understand exactly why that single alert should have stopped the entire country cold. But it didn't. And that silence is almost as disturbing as the storm itself. Before we get into it, drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this, and what time is it for you? I want to know how far this story is reaching, because 170,000 Americans are about to live through something the rest of the country may never fully understand. And we are going to change that, starting right now. Let's rewind, because to understand why that 3 a.m. alert hit differently, you need to understand what was already happening in the Western Pacific. A tropical disturbance had been organizing quietly for days. Nothing that made headlines, nothing that triggered wall-to-wall coverage, just a system spinning over warm, open ocean, gathering energy, finding its structure. The kind of thing that forecasters monitor as a matter of routine. And then it stopped being routine. Within 24 hours, the system went from a tropical storm to a Category 4. Within another 18 hours, it crossed into Category 5 territory. Meteorologists have a specific term for what happened: rapid intensification. The official definition is a sustained wind speed increase of at least 35 miles per hour within a 24-hour period. This storm cleared that threshold and kept going. By the time the National Weather Service issued that alert, sustained winds had reached 180 miles per hour. 180. That is not a number that appears often in any forecast database. That is the kind of wind speed that doesn't just damage structures, it erases them. And here is the detail that makes everything worse. The storm was moving slowly. 15 kilometers per hour. That sounds almost gentle until you understand what it means in practice. A fast-moving storm hits hard and moves on. A slow-moving storm parks. It doesn't sweep through, it grinds. Every hour of Category 5 conditions is another hour of structural fatigue on every roof, every wall, every power line in the impact zone. Slow is more destructive than fast, and this storm was taking its time. The track was the other thing keeping forecasters up. The projected path placed to the center of the storm threading directly toward a chain of American islands in the Pacific, not near them, not clipping the edge of them, threading directly toward populated American territory with a population of approximately 170,000 people, who had no meaningful evacuation option. Because you cannot drive off an island, you cannot get in your car and head inland. When the storm comes, you shelter in place, and you survive or you don't. The National Weather Service issued an extreme severity classification. Out of every active weather alert across the United States and all its territories at that moment, only a handful had ever reached that level. This was one of them. The people whose entire career is built around measuring and classifying atmospheric danger looked at this storm and reached for a category they almost never use. And the country barely looked up. Now we need to talk about something that doesn't get said clearly enough. The islands in this storm's path are not American allies. They are not partner nations that receive U.S. support. They are the United States of America. The people who live there are American citizens from birth. They hold American passports. They pay into American federal systems. They serve in the United States military at per capita rates that rival or exceed most states in the continental U.S. And they cannot vote for president. That sentence is the key to understanding almost everything that follows, because the political architecture of how the United States responds to disasters is built almost entirely around electoral consequences. When a hurricane threatens a major coastal state, every layer of the political system activates immediately. Governors declare emergencies on camera. Senators make calls. The federal machinery moves because the people in the path of that storm have direct and immediate electoral leverage over the officials responsible for their welfare. They can vote those officials out. They can organize. They can hold people accountable in ways that show up in election results. The residents of these Pacific territories have none of that leverage. They are fully American by citizenship and nearly invisible by political structure. And over decades, that invisibility has produced a specific and measurable outcome: infrastructure that has been allowed to age and deteriorate in ways that would never be tolerated if the people living underneath it had Senate representation. The power grid serving these islands relies on generation equipment that is approaching or has already exceeded 50 years of operational age. 50 years. Equipment designed in a different era, built to different standards, patched and extended and worked around as the population grew around it. When a major typhoon knocked out power to nearly the entire island territory in 2023, it was not a new failure. It was the same failure mode replaying itself. The grid collapses, the lights go out, not in patches, completely. And on an isolated island, power is not just comfort, power is water. Water distribution depends on electrically powered pumps. When the grid fails, water pressure fails. Hospitals shift to backup generators with limited fuel. Medical refrigeration for insulin, vaccines, and blood supplies becomes a crisis within hours. The cascade doesn't take days to start, it starts almost immediately. And then the recovery begins. Except recovery on an isolated island doesn't work the way it works anywhere else. Every generator, every length of cable, every repair crew, every piece of equipment has to arrive by ship or by plane. When the port is damaged and the airport is closed, the supply chain doesn't slow down, it stops. You cannot send a convoy of utility trucks from the next county. There is no next county. There is only ocean. Previous storms have left communities here without consistent power for months, not weeks, months. The recovery from storms 5 and 6 years ago is still in some areas incomplete. These islands are not starting from a baseline of full readiness. They are starting from a baseline that previous storms already compromised. And now a Category 5 is about to stress test every single one of those compromises at once. The wind, the storm surge, the rainfall, each one alone would be a serious emergency. Together, arriving at the same time, sustained over an extended period by a slow-moving storm, they interact in ways that multiply the damage beyond what any single threat assessment captures. The wind arrives and tears apart structures and power lines. Then the surge arrives and it doesn't just flood, it moves with enough force and weight to undermine foundations and push debris at lethal velocity. Then the rainfall saturates the inland areas, destabilizes slopes, floods roads that are already blocked, and fills every low-lying space with contaminated water. And each phase prevents response to the one before it. You cannot clear debris while surge is still running. You cannot restore power while crews cannot safely access the lines. The cascade is not just about what the storm does. It is about how each element of the storm prevents recovery from the elements that came before it. This is why the wind speed, as extreme as it is actually not the most frightening number in this story. The most frightening number is the timeline. How long until the ports reopen? How long until the airport restarts operations? How long until the supply chain restarts on an island 3,800 miles from the nearest major logistics hub? How long until 170,000 Americans can get the food, the fuel, the medicine, and the materials they need to begin putting things back together? That timeline is measured in weeks at best, and the storm season does not pause during the recovery.
Here is what I told you at the beginning of this video that I was going to explain. The reason that 3 a.m. alert felt different, the reason the meteorologist reading it checked the system twice, it wasn't just the wind speed, it wasn't just the track, it was the timing. This storm reached Category 5 in April. April. The Western Pacific typhoon season is supposed to peak between August and October. April is the off-season. The ocean is supposed to be cooler. The atmospheric conditions are supposed to be less favorable. A Category 5 super typhoon in April is not supposed to happen at this level of intensity. The historical record says so clearly. But the historical record was built on an ocean that no longer exists. Sea surface temperatures across the Western Pacific this April were running 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above the long-term average for this time of year. That sounds modest. It is not. The relationship between ocean temperature and storm intensity is not linear. Small increases in water temperature translate into disproportionately larger amounts of energy available to a developing storm. And this storm wasn't just sitting on warm surface water. The warm layer extended deep. What forecasters call ocean heat content, the thermal energy stored not just at the surface but down through the water column, was running at levels described as unusual for this time of year. The storm could churn the ocean as much as it wanted, and the water temperature barely changed. The fuel supply wasn't a shallow puddle, it was a tank, and the tank was full. Add to that the wind shear environment. Wind shear is the change in wind speed and direction at different atmospheric levels, and it is the most effective natural check on storm intensification. High shear tears the storm structure apart. Low shear lets it build freely. Shear values across this storm's path were extremely low. The atmosphere was not fighting back. Deep warm water and low wind shear simultaneously is what forecasters describe as a favorable environment. It is the meteorological equivalent of handing a fire both fuel and oxygen and then removing the firefighters. The storm didn't form because of a weather anomaly. It formed because the conditions that should exist at peak season in August are now present in April. The season is getting longer. The margins that the calendar used to provide are shrinking, and the zone where rapid intensification is possible is expanding both geographically and seasonally. Climate scientists will tell you honestly that no single storm can be attributed to a single cause. That is the accurate scientific answer, and it matters. But they will also tell you that the conditions producing this storm are completely consistent with the trend projections. Anomalously warm April waters, unusually low shear, a favorable atmospheric environment months before historical peak season. These are not surprises to the models. They are what the models have been projecting for years. The future may simply be arriving early. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This may not be the worst storm of the year. The ocean still has more stored energy to express. The conditions are not going away before the peak season arrives. If the heat content anomalies persist through June and July and into the August through October window, the foundation exists for a season that produces intensity records that have stood for decades. Sinlaku may be the opening act. So what does any of this have to do with us? With people watching from continents away, from cities that have never heard of these islands, from places where this story hasn't made the news cycle? It has everything to do with us, because these are American citizens being hit by the strongest storm currently on the planet. They serve in the military that defends the country that is not watching them right now. They hold the same passport you hold. They live on the same flag you live under. And the infrastructure that failed them before, the aging grid, the isolated supply chain, the political structure that makes them visible on a map and invisible in a budget. That infrastructure was built by the same decisions, the same resource allocations, the same political calculus that shapes every community in this country. The gap between what these islands have been given and what they need is not an accident of geography. It is a consequence of political invisibility. And political invisibility only persists as long as the rest of the country allows it to. The storm is going to do what storms do. The question is what happens after. Whether the coverage shows up, whether the resources follow, whether the recovery gets the sustained national attention it will need over months, not days, to actually work. Whether the infrastructure investments that have been documented and recommended and deferred for decades finally get treated as the urgent national obligation they actually are. 170,000 Americans are about to find out which version of this country shows up for them. The wind is picking up outside their windows right now. The 3 a.m. alert was real. The storm is real. The moment is real. The only question left is whether the response will be.